Welcome to the Background Noise Podcast, where this week we are taking a break from our Spooky Month Jamboree. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Joe.
I'm Joseph.
And this week the topic is Desert Power. That's right. This week we are talking about Denis Villeneuve's newest film, Dune, Part 1. And this week, we mentioned a little bit about it at the end of the episode last week, but we decided to bring in a special guest, a local Dune expert, if you will.
A local mentat.
That's right. He's a mutual friend to the three of us on the podcast and someone I've had the misfortune of knowing since high school. Sam Page, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. So to start out, if you could actually just talk about your introduction to Dune, your experience with it leading up to this film.
Absolutely. I feel that claims to my knowledge of Dune have been greatly exaggerated, but no. So I came to Dune, I think through the book. I think was the first way that I experienced it. It was the audiobook because I struggle to read dense novels. Audiobook for sure. Really fell in love with this fantastic hybrid of science fiction and fantasy. Really bridges the gap between those, which led me to discover more books. I've read now almost all of the original 6. Working through the last one. I've seen the original quote unquote David Lynch Dune from 1984 multiple times. I will claim that badge of dishonor. But fantastic property. Was really excited to get into this. Deeply disappointed by the year-long delay, and just really excited for this movie.
Awesome.
I think.
Go for it, Joe.
Well, of the four of us, of the three of us who are regulars on the podcast, I have the most experience. Obviously, less experience than our esteemed, honored guest. Knowledgeable he is. I think there were other people that I listened to on YouTube or on podcast who referenced Dune as being this really big sci-fi, like really popular big sci-fi property, and as it being a kind of hybrid fantasy sci-fi thing where it's technically, it's got the Star Warsy, Star Trekkiness of you're going to different planets and you have to deal with a galactic empire, kind of actually a universal empire in this particular situation. But it feels much more fantasy-like because everyone's fighting with swords and they deal with prophecies and things like that, which is very much more of a fantasy kind of genre trope. So I finally read the book. I read the first. I have read Dune, the first book, and I actually read it because I don't know, maybe I hate myself more than you do, Sam, because I was able to read that dense piece of literature.
Look at this guy; he can read.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. I got 2 eyes and everything. I can actually read stuff. So I read the first book probably sometime last year is when I finished it, and planned to read the rest of them. I was kind of wanting to read the rest of them, and then after seeing this movie, and I've only seen this newest movie, which is Part 1. I didn't see the old 1980 whatever
84.
1984 movie, but having seen this one, I'm like, yeah, okay, I want to know more about this world, so I'm going to go back and read the rest of them eventually.
Nice. I definitely have far less experience than both you and Sam on this, Joe, but I had heard of Dune probably for years. Just the name, it's usually associated with other classic pieces of science fiction literature like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, stuff like that. And when I heard there was a film coming out, I think I heard it through like a YouTuber I like. He had said it was like one of the ones he was most looking forward to. A lot of the YouTubers I like for film reviews and all that ranked it very high on their list for films they were looking forward to. And I mean, it sounded good. The director, Denis Villeneuve, I've seen a couple of his films before. I think I'd seen Prisoners, which, while a well-told story, would not recommend, was a bit disturbing. Not really worth it. And then Arrival, I thought was kind of meh. So he's done very well with his films. Like, he's a director who I've heard a lot of good things about. And so this looked promising. And so at this point, I've picked up the audiobook with the intention of listening to it. I've borrowed the book with the intention of reading it, so progress. But going into this movie, I had very little knowledge except for very basic information that you'd probably read on the back of a DVD. So, but yeah, we'll get into my thoughts on the film later. But yeah, very limited knowledge going into it. So
you knew there was a big planet that was covered in sand and there were giant worms?
Basically, yeah. And that sand was really important.
A planet covered in dunes?
Nah. It's almost like that's where the planet gets its nickname from.
Are there dunes in that movie?
I'm not following. That's a bit too much for me. Much like David Lynch's film, a lot of stuff's going over not really going over my head. It's just really my big experiences were, I can't remember when I watched it, but as a general fan of the 80s, it's like, oh yeah, Dune. What is it? You got to watch that. And it's like, oh, well, that's cool. And at the time I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with David Lynch's particular style. So it was like, what the... This is the closest thing I'm going to get to a drug trip, isn't it? So needless to say, my introduction to Dune was very much, push into the pool and, was it trial by fire? I haven't read the books. I feel bad because, I've been trying to get back into reading. Might, try to ease in through audiobooks like, Sam did, but I want to read it. And, well, I got to say, if this, this latest movie is any indication of the quality of the book, which I'm sure it is, then I am missing out because I really loved this, this movie. It was a lot of, I say a lot of fun. It's not like fun like Venom Let There Be Carnage is fun. It's like an actual competent movie that looks beautiful, and you can tell there's a lot of skill and talent put behind it, and because of that, you can enjoy it. Of course, I've already gotten into, the thoughts on the film, but really that film is the only thing I have with Dune, and the acid trip that is the 84 one.
Sure. Yeah, but I'm definitely pretty similar with you, Joseph, where it's like, you still have one up on me with the 84. Well, I don't know if maybe one below me with the 84 film. That's probably against you having seen that. But
they're very the two are very different. Yes,
I think having seen the 84 Dune, not read the book, and still wanting to see this probably speaks very highly to how much you could see in the concept.
Oh yeah,
because that movie is wow,
interesting.
I hope you're not friends with the person who told you to watch it still. Let's just put it that way.
Well, to be fair, it was the internet, so unfortunately I'm still friends with him.
Oh.
Well, it's kind of hard to not be friends with the internet at this point, but you don't really have a choice anymore.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into the movie, we're not even going to bother trying to do spoiler-free and spoiler-heavy reviews. We're just going to pretty much just go all over the place. So if you have not seen it yet, definitely, we're just going to say it now. It was great. Definitely worth a watch. So go watch it, preferably in theaters just to support the film. But if you can't, it's on HBO Max. And then come back and listen to the episode and listen to us ramble about this for 45 minutes. So
watch it right now.
Yeah, there you go.
We say go and watch it and bring the podcast with you. No, don't even leave now. Find the nearest showing, and then afterwards buy all the merchandise if there is.
And then listen to our podcast on the way back from buying the merch.
There you go.
Or you can pull a Joseph and watch the movie while listening to the podcast at the same time, just like he watches the movies that we're talking about while recording the podcast.
You watch the last 10 minutes of a Disney movie about witches once. Listen, Sam, if you ever come back, just know whatever you do now will always be written down and never forgotten. Especially if you don't watch a movie until the day you record the podcast. Anyway.
Noted.
Alrighty, well, I guess we can just jump into it.
Spoiler sound.
There we go.
Is that the spoiler sound effect?
I don't know, Jack. That's your call.
I guess it is now. Okay. First, I just want to give a shout out to Villeneuve's directing of this film. He particularly, when it comes to filming scope, I thought, like, even though I didn't necessarily love Arrival, when you compare how the humans look in comparison to the giant alien ship that they're all trying to go on, he's very good with scale. And when you see them in Dune running from the sandworm, it looks so good. It looks just so real. And so he was very good. I mean, even when you have Josh Brolin, the general character, and the rest of them running as all the ships are exploding, they look like real ships exploding, and they look like really tiny compared to the ships. Like comparison, he's very good at filming that. And I definitely think that was highlighted here with both things like the sandworms and some of the different fight scenes and explosions on set.
Yeah, there's one scene in particular that really shows it off, where where Paul and his mom are because of reasons in the movie, they're running across the sand dune, and they end up being sort of chased by a worm, and they get onto rocks where the worms can't get to them, and you watch the worm like rear up out of the sand, and the mouth opens up, and it's the first thing that I think of that's most comparable is, I think of like in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie when the Kraken rears up and takes the ship, except it's 100 times better than that easily. Like you actually believe that this is a 400-meter long worm that was very annoyed that it didn't get to eat these humans that it was chasing, with the like bristle teeth fang thingies.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying and awesome in the best way.
Very good at displaying, Villeneuve? It's just, since this is essentially a space Shakespearean tragedy, he does a very good job of capturing helplessness. Going up against a giant worm, all you can do is run. You're under attack and you can't possibly defend yourselves. It's all crazy. And then just great with suspense too. I mean, they go hand in hand, those two things. But the one that sticks out for me in particular, and it's kind of might be not one that immediately springs to mind, is like when Paul and Jessica are trying to escape the ecological facility or whatever it was. They're trying to get away from I'm just going to call them Sakharans because I can't remember their real name. But the elite soldiers or whatever. It's just, it keeps cutting back to like that dark opening, like cutting back to they're not able to start the ship, and it just keeps cutting back to that opening. The really big one is like it also helps that they're in the white armor, so it's just like you're keeping your eyes out for anything happening, and it's just a little snippet of just I don't know, competence.
Yeah, I thought there's kind of the same moment when Paul and Jessica have been captured by the Harkonnen soldiers, and they're being flown out in the desert because of shenanigans. The Harkonnens can't just kill them, because if they just kill them, then it causes political problems. So they're going to fly them out in the desert and then just drop them off and let the desert kill them. But like that scene,
going by some jigsaw logic there.
Well, yeah, exactly, because it's not murder if you drop someone in the middle of the desert and leave them there without any food or water and giant sandworms that'll eat them if they move. That's not murder. That's just getting rid of bodies.
That's just good politics.
Yeah. It's PvE, not PvP.
PvE, yes. If I push you into the environmental hazard, then the environmental hazard killed you instead of me killing you. But that scene where they're in that thopter and like Paul knows that in theory maybe he would be able to stop these people, but he's not sure if he can do it. And like Jessica's there, and she definitely could stop them if she wasn't gagged, because she has mind control powers with the voice. That's essentially what the voice is mind control. And there's like, we know that everyone in this position has the tools to get out of this alive, but are they going to actually be able to do it in time before they get killed? Very, very well done. Even though you know that they're not going to die there, again, like, it's well done as a suspense thing.
You don't know if they're not going to die, but you don't know if they're not going to, how intact they're going to be once they get out.
That's fair.
Speaking of the voice, Joe, something that I thought this film did a very good job with was, I mean, just coming into it as somebody who had not read Dune and knew little to nothing about it, the visual storytelling of it, the way that through the different scenes, they were able to explain how things work, like the voice, without doing a bunch of, just exposition dumps, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that's probably why the film is doing so well, because I guarantee you there's no way all of those people have read Dune. I think there's probably a decent amount of people who have gone in just to watch the film, and because they, maybe not at first it was maybe a little confusing, but because he was able to convey the important elements of the story well, it worked, and people were able to understand it even if they hadn't read the book. And so I think he did a very good job with that, especially.
Mm-hmm.
To piggyback off that, one of the coolest things in this movie, just aside from the fact that it is really a if not line for line, a spiritually faithful retelling of the story of the first half of the book, just the fact that I've lost my train of thought. I really have lost my train of thought.
Oh, somebody's gagged him. He can't use the voice.
The fact that in the book, you start off knowing almost nothing. Herbert doesn't start off with exposition. He doesn't do a lot of explanation. You get little tidbits at the beginning of the chapters that kind of almost give away what's going to happen. But for the most part, you're brought completely blindfolded into this world that he then kind of strings you along, feeding you just enough information to introduce the new concepts a little at a time. It's not this massive dump of new science fiction concepts or new fantasy concepts. And I like the fact that the movie, and in comparison to Lynch's version, which is 80s exposition voiceover for like inner thoughts, like shows its hand immediately. This movie kind of captures that quality of the book, where it leads you in. It introduces a few things at a time. It doesn't try to give you all of this at once and exhaust you in the first 20 minutes of the movie, which is really cool. And it shows a familiarity with the written work that's really cool to see. You don't see very often in film adaptation.
Yeah,
that's really cool. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, like, there's so many scenes I can think of where they do seamlessly, not even like the magic or sci-fi-ness of it, because there's the scene where Paul and his mom are eating breakfast. That's like the first or second scene, I feel like, in the movie, and they teach you the voice, and you get the understanding that Paul and Jessica are both somewhat unusual because they can do this thing. But there's also the casual way that, oh, you need to report in full dress for this thing, and then Paul asks, is it military or ceremonial? And the way that plays out sounds normal conversational, but it also is telling you, the viewer, that hey, Paul isn't just not only is he like magically not normal person, but he's also a unusual individual within the societal hierarchy. The fact that he has to report to his father, and they're going to be presented in some kind of ceremonial fashion for some kind of event that's coming up. All like those are obviously, as a person who understands what's going on, I don't need that, but it is very naturally done in the movie in a
Yeah.
way that makes sense.
Yeah, just from what again, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, just from seeing the film, it didn't seem like he tried to dumb it down for the audience. It seemed like he was trying to present the story. It seemed like someone who loved the story and actually read the story, unlike David Lynch, and was trying to present his best version and really capture the heart of Dune in a film and present it to a way to best capture the story. And I feel like that worked very well. And I think a lot of the audience was still able to catch on whether they read the book or not. I just, yeah, goes back to how well the story, I think, was told, even though it's only half a story.
Yeah.
So
I think that this movie proves that audiences aren't as stupid as a lot of directors and scriptwriters think they are. And if you write a movie and direct a movie, assuming your audience has an intelligence that's higher than the wattage of the average light bulb, they can still follow the movie and understand what's going on.
That was my biggest fear going into this movie,
Yeah.
again, because of Lynch's rendition. And even before that, Jodorowsky's pitch, the original Dune that later became Lynch's Dune, both from men who had not read the book and had no real source, like respect for the source material. My greatest fear, especially in the wake of Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, is that in order to make a Hollywood blockbuster, they're going to strip out all of the philosophy, all of the nuance, all of the things that make the property unique, in order to make sure that as many people as possible don't get lost along the way, and they can make as much money. And it's frustrating. And so it was really, really exciting. It's why I watched it at home on HBO Max like a loser, because I didn't want to be disappointed in the theater and have no place to go other than out.
Yeah, it was a pretty good movie, but I mean, this guy just like screamed and threw up his hands and ran out of the theater. It was weird.
I think transitioning from more of like the directing to the cast and like the acting, before we go into like specific performances from those who actually read the book, watching these portrayals, were any of them like what you imagined the characters being like in the book? Were they super different? What were your thoughts there?
Which is the better Paul, Sam?
I have to say, I was originally skeptical when they announced Timothée Chalamet as Paul. I'm like, popular actor, but actually having seen, honestly, even all of the main cast, having seen the movie now, I can say for sure they nailed it with the casting. The main cast, the backup cast, like the supporting characters. I have no complaints about the casting, except for one thing, which I'll be happy to go into now if you want.
Before you do, I realize now. It's been kind of a long day at work. I said that Oscar Isaacs was, Patrick Stewart's character. It was Josh Brolin. I meant, because he's a Gurney, right?
Yes.
Sorry. But either way, two really good ones in the new one and the old one. Hard to compare.
And that's a great segue, because that's the character I want to complain about.
Ooh.
Because in the novel, Gurney Hallock he's a musician, he's a fighter, he's full of quotations and poetry, but he can also kill a man by barely moving.
A true Renaissance man.
A true Renaissance man.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately, I think, really lost in Brolin's portrayal. He's not that much of a main character in the first part of the book. He has some more screen time. Spoilers for part 2. He has some more screen time. Does he have more screen time? Anyway,
I would say he does.
If I remember correctly, he gets more screen time later on if they do that. And they lost that. There's no music. He famously carries around a balisette, which is a 9-stringed musical instrument, which he's seen in almost every scene carrying in the book, completely missing from the movie. I did see it was addressed by Villeneuve, but I just felt like the movie is 2.5 hours long. You couldn't have squeezed 40 seconds of a musical reference in there.
I think there is exactly one time when he has like a rhyming couplet that he says.
Yes. On the carrier as they're landing, he does have a reference. It's not an overt reference. It does not stick out in my mind the way that a lot of his overt references are to even poetry that you or I would know, or in some elements he quotes the Bible or their version of the Bible in the year 10,000. But he's also a very comedic character, and that's Josh Brolin's comedy. It tends to be like more of the dry, like the straight man, for the funny character to play off of, as the role that he plays in all the other movies that he's in. And so for him to play a character who is the more the initiator of the wit, as it were, kind of fell flat a little bit for me. But that's kind of a minor complaint. He doesn't have a lot of screen time.
See, I would, if I was an instrument being played by Josh Brolin, I'd be terrified of being crushed.
Especially a delicate wooden instrument.
I feel like they tried to have an audition for instruments for Josh Brolin to play, and they all, like, no instruments came to the audition because they realized Josh Brolin would be holding them. And so they were just like, forget this. So, I mean, they tried. It was just, what are you going to do?
Mr. Villeneuve, I'm afraid we can't complete your vision. The casting call came unanswered. Oh, you mean for the role? No, for the instruments. I'm sorry?
Excuse you?
I have to say probably my favorite character in the film. I mean, I think they were all great. I think some YouTuber I like made this comment, which I think is very funny. The only negative side to having such a stacked cast is a very weak poster because it's just all of their faces on it, because you have to fit all of the great actors on it. So it's a weak poster, but all of the acting was on point. I think my favorite was, I thought Jason Momoa was fantastic. I mean, I already loved him I never saw him in Stargate or Game of Thrones or anything like that, but I thought he was very good as Aquaman, so I liked him there. So I already knew I liked him as Aquaman, but seeing him in this, it's like, I want more Jason Momoa. I really liked him as an actor, and I thought he was very good in this, and I'd love to see more of his stuff. Oscar Isaac, again, was great. Very excited to see him as Moon Knight. Man, it just, everyone, I thought, even Josh Brolin, who didn't have a lot of screen time and may have not necessarily been as much like his character in the book as he should have been, he was still, I thought, he did a good job acting with probably what he was given. So I thought he was good. Rebecca Ferguson is amazing. She's always amazing. She's great in Mission Impossible films. What else was she in recently? Greatest Showman. Yeah. She's always good. And Stellan Skarsgård was terrifying as the bad guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I really don't have any complaints about the cast. Zendaya was probably in it less than people thought she would be, but I'm not necessarily a huge Zendaya fan, so I didn't really care.
Technically, she was in the movie fairly frequently because every time Paul fell asleep, she was in those scenes where he was dreaming.
Fair.
The girl of my dreams.
Much like the rest of teenage America.
Well, yeah.
Wah, wah.
I mean,
Wow.
Paul is a 15-year-old boy. I really, there's a part of me, I wouldn't be faithful to the book at all, but there's a part of me where he says to his mom, I've been having dreams, and he says that he's been dreaming about this girl, and she's like, yeah, you're a 15-year-old boy. No kidding. Of course you're dreaming about a random girl.
That's normal.
I'd be concerned if you weren't. But so, yeah, but that is interesting that they put her a lot in the
Trailers, yeah.
But she has a much bigger role. Again, she has a much bigger role in the second half. That character does because now he's amongst the Fremen. So
yeah,
obviously he actually is doing stuff with them now, as opposed to thinking about doing stuff with them.
Yeah, it's funny. She plays a big role. Is like she plays a pretty big role in the film. It's just not as a character. It's as a I don't want to say plot device for Paul, but it's like as a almost a guide and like as a piece of kind of something that drives Paul to develop as a character, not her specifically, but again, like you said, it's her and her connection to the Fremen and all, and it's again, it's a significant role, but it's definitely not a big poster role. Kind of like Javier Bardem off in the corner. Poor guy.
I think. I mean, the book itself is also divided into two halves, and in the first half of the book, the main character is the Atreides family. So the Duke, Jessica, and Paul are collectively the main character in the first half of the book, and they are collectively the main character in the first movie. And then in the second half, the dad is dead. Spoilers. And Jessica
going out in the best way you can.
Which we should talk about that, but we'll circle around to that. But then Jessica also kind of steps back as Paul becomes the main character, and so the people that he makes relationships with become more important because he becomes the central character. So which I'm assuming is how they're going to do the second movie, assuming it gets made.
Which we'll get to.
Yeah, that's very much in keeping with how the book is, where the main character is that core family unit.
And I think that shows great restraint on the part of the filmmakers here to have, some of these really in-demand actors now, and then just put them in the movie enough to satisfy their part in that story up until that point,
True.
They're going to be really important in part 2. But I feel like the temptation is often when you adapt a movie, you cast all these people and then they've all got to get FaceTime. They've all got to get screen time. They've all got to get their look in. They all got to get that. They got to make their top billing so that they can, get their name out there. And they were really respectful of the story in making sure that those characters didn't outshine outside of their place, that they're going to be introduced naturally over the course of the story.
Yeah.
There was one thing that I noted with that, and it wasn't with any characters being out of their place. There is a few times where people are walking around in their still suits and their water filtration suits, but they don't have the mask on, and they don't even have like the nose tube thing on, and it's so that you can get like a glamour shot of their face, and you can have cinematic shots of their face. There's a couple of times that stick out. The one that sticks out the most is the very last scene when they're walking I think they're like walking to go join the main Fremen group. Where Paul and Jessica are walking across the sand and neither of them is wearing anything on their face, and it's because it's the last scene, and so that's a set piece shot as opposed to a practical thing. That's a thing that stuck out to me, which I guess is fine. It's not that big of a deal. It's just it's a little nitpicky thing that I noticed.
Yeah, but I definitely would. Going back off what Sam mentioned, just to summarize, I definitely don't think. I think Villeneuve did a great job at not letting the star power compromise the story and letting, making sure everybody had their, 10 minutes of screen time and all that. It was very much like, okay, we're putting the story first. We definitely want you all to be in the film because you're all great at what you do, but you're going to be doing this character and you're going to be playing this role doing this. And so I think they all did very well with that. So I think that pretty much covers the acting part of it. Before we go into negatives, if you guys have any, was there anything else you really wanted to cover?
I mean, there's a lot. How long do you want your podcast to be?
We are just under 40 minutes right now. And so we rather not have this go over an hour. So
4 to 5 hours.
So I guess we can talk about like favorite scenes, highlights, anything that really stuck out. If you guys want to go over that, other than we've already gone over.
I just want to shout out the emotional depth captured in this film. I think they did a fantastic job from the casting, from the directing, from the framing, just the way the scenes are put together, like the big dramatic emotional scenes, the happy scenes, what few of them there are. Extremely austere film. The upsetting, the triumphant, the nobility of these characters, and when the curtains pulled aside and you see behind the facade of royalty to the wrestling that they have with what is happening to some of them, is really cool. Excellently done. Absolutely just fantastic. I felt with the characters, which is a thing I find, especially in more of these blockbuster science fiction movies, not doing.
Yep.
That's fair.
It's a very good summary, honestly, in terms of the impact. I mean,
like one of the big examples of that, just to like kind of drill down, because both the mom and the dad are characters who play like they play characters within their universe, right? Because Leto is a duke, and so he has to play the role of the duke. He has to play that role as a high-ranking nobility, but he's also a dad, and you can see that contrast in his personality of him having to juggle those two roles.
Absolutely.
And you see the same thing in Jessica and her having to deal with, because she's a member of the secret society of the Bene Gesserit, and there are moments where she's being very calm and collected, and she's being very she's being the member of the secret society, and then you cut to when her son is being tested, and she knows that she's not allowed to be upset, and she's fighting with the fact that her son is being tortured, but also she's not allowed to be upset about the fact that her son's being tortured. Like great example, like examples of what you're talking about. Of you can feel that these characters are people that have roles that they have to play, and they do what they have to do, and also you can feel the cost of them having to do what they have to do.
Yeah, they really do feel real, which is great.
Yeah, I think that just goes back to just the great cast, the great acting. They just all did such a good job with their characters. They're all so believable. I mean, just going back to Rebecca Ferguson, just how much pain she was in, that Paul was having to go through that test, all of that, just their journey, the brief time we're with Oscar Isaac. You can just see the love he has for Paul. These just characters in this world felt so real, and they just did such a great job with that. Relationship that Paul had with Duncan, you just tell there was a lot of history there. Just every single relationship with the characters was just excellent. It was just very convincing, and I think that just goes to show how great of a cast they really had. So,
speaking of the cast and going back to Stellan Skarsgård, it's just going back to the '84 movie and like comparing the two. It's day and night again. Yeah, we can talk about the 84 movie a lot, but it's like, as disgusting as like the Baron is in that one, it's like it's almost played kind of for laughs. I mean, of course, he's this horrible person who does help bring about the main conflict in addition to the Emperor. Also, glad they didn't show the Emperor in this one. It's kind of good for that little mystery for part 2 or whatever. But Stellan Skarsgård he's terrifying in this one, and they do a very good job of the levitation stuff. It's a lot more grounded, I suppose. And again, it's like with the Emperor's blades or whatever they are.
The Sardaukar.
The Sardaukar, thank you. And with the Sardaukar too, they make like the levitation not like, "Ooh, I'm flying." It's more like I'm propelling myself forward through sheer sheer will and anger.
Yeah.
And it's just, he does a great job of being just really, really off-putting, which again, it's like, I suppose the whole House of the Hartikins is supposed to be kind of like this. I don't know what to say other than off-putting with, with the albino Batista and, all that. And it's just like this oppressive force. He does a great job, of course, and the direction's there too. And I, again, like how they handled his, his confrontation with Leto, and kind of how that did, and definitely like it a little better than the 84 one, in addition to some other things. And
Just a little bit.
Just a little.
I think the thing with the 84, like you're saying, that with the Baron in that movie, they really play up just like how like horrible and like the unspeakable things that he does, the fact that he's basically an animal, versus in this they go from more of the more understated, like corrupt politician, like the moves behind the moves kind of guy, who's got puppets in everybody's house, and who's controlling things from so far behind the scenes that he's outside of the building.
Yeah, you almost get the sense that he's a person who has so much control over every aspect of his life and over everything around him, that the indulgence that he has in his grotesque consumption of food is like the outlet of he's so much a rigid character that's so focused on all these machinations, and this is his one vice that he indulges in, and that's why he has indulged so much that he needs a floaty suit in order to be able to even move around. And they pull out that grotesquerie with startling degrees of realism.
Yeah, it's much more understated, the grotesquerie, which is it
the oil bath kind of
cuts away from the campiness of the 84 movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Only other thing I wanted to add, I mean, minor thing. Hans Zimmer's always a win. I thought he did a very good job with the score. Thought it complemented the film very well.
I mean, he's great, but is he Toto? Yes.
That's what I said.
Yes, that's right. The Toto.
I will go on record now saying that Toto's soundtrack for the 84 film is the best part of that movie. If you like guitar riffs and synthesized orchestras, go and listen to the Toto soundtrack.
Oh no, I think it's me.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that it's great. What does make sense to me is why they would even bother to get Sting for the movie if they're not going to have him sing some song. I'm still mad that he didn't sing his song Desert Rose on the desert planet of Arrakis.
A lost opportunity.
Opportunity wasted.
I still can't get past that one. That's like, all right, yeah, I get it. I get the trippy visuals. That's with the style. All right, maybe I get Toto. It's like the futuristic thing, and it's like, I'm sorry, who's coming out of the pod?
Oh man.
I think if we were to go into things I didn't like, as far as the film, I can't think of really much at all. I thought it was very all well told, all that, very exciting. The only thing is not only is there not a part 2 yet, I mean, it's like it hasn't even been announced. I can't think of a single time this has happened with. I mean, I can think of plenty of films that have multiple parts to them. I can't think of a single time where a film has been released and they have not even started working on the second one yet. And there's been no official announcement of a second one for something on this scale in like a long time.
This has had so much hype. What is it? If half of these, I say half of these is like, oh, well, what movies you're talking about? I don't know. You can think off the top of your head like a ton of movies that didn't deserve sequels that got them in like, I don't know, the past 10 years. If this doesn't get one, I'm gonna send a very strongly worded letter to what is it, Warner Brothers. But yeah, I don't think there's a world where there is not a Dune Part 2. And
I'd be extremely shocked if it doesn't
least.
happen. Right. Yeah. I mean, who knows? They might even do, Dune Messiah, and they might do others. That'd be great. But just since I'm definitely more of a pessimist than an optimist, unfortunately. So I'm just going back to thinking that, if it doesn't happen, would I even go back and revisit this knowing that because it does very much have an abrupt ending. It is very much this is definitely a part 1 and this is not the end of the story. So.
Oh yeah, from the start you get that feeling. Even though, I mean, yeah, it says Dune Part 1, but even then, it's like midway through the movie, it's like you're watching the opening scene. It's like you could have the breakfast scene and then do a quick cut to them landing on Arrakis, and then do one dream thing, and then show the Harkonnens blowing everything up, and then do the rest of the film. Or do the rest of the book in the film, and it would have been passable. But
you just described the screenplay for the 84 Dune.
Exactly.
That's what happens. It's there's about 20 minutes. That's the 20 minutes at the beginning of the book, and then basically a glorified music video, which is a montage of all of the events of his life up until the end, and then the big battle, and then you're done, and you're like, was I on drugs?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
So several people were on drugs in the making of that, I'm sure.
On some sort of spice.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
spice melange.
It's spice is fascinating. We can talk about the world building.
Can we talk about the spice? I've been wanting to talk about the spice for a long time.
I mean, I very much enjoy the world building of Dune. The fact that here is this world where really the entirety of the universe revolves around this one planet, and the fact that it's the only source of the magic substance that can do all of the cool things. And yet that place where you get it from is a place that nobody wants to be on. Nobody wants to be on Arrakis, except for the people who are on Arrakis their entire lives and don't know of anything better. And even they probably don't want to actually be there. They just don't know. They can't imagine anything better than where they are.
Well, I thought the only people who don't want to be there is just the House Atreides, because the other guys like Stellan Skarsgård and all, they actually do want to be there, right, to get all of the spice, or is that not the case?
But they don't
Desperately.
Well, they want the spice, but they don't want the world and the people with it.
They don't want to be on Arrakis. They want to own Arrakis.
Gotcha.
And all the wealth that you get from owning it. They don't want to be there themselves.
That's why the Baron sends his nephew to go rule Arrakis in his stead. He's like, I don't want to be there.
Yep.
Have you seen my head? It would burn so quickly.
I mean, I don't know, with the paleness of Dave Bautista, I think he might sunburn. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
Not true to real life.
Oh, that really was an incredibly off-putting thing. It's like, I know I've said off-putting about the Harkonnens a lot, but it's like, it's like Dave Bautista, a very non-white individual, just completely full-on no eyebrows, suffering from albinism. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, the spice is a really cool concept.
Hmm.
You can definitely see. I will say I will bring in that age old gripe. You can see why some people would claim that Star Wars is ripped off of Dune. In the way that you have this sort of mystic ability that some can, everyone uses the spice, but only some people can use it to see the future. And it kind of parallels how the Force is in Star Wars. Well, I don't want to go into that, but the spice is why I classify Dune as science fantasy, because in fantasy, at some point, whether it's a major thing or down to the minutest detail, you have something that's rooted in like magic or a supernatural concept. And so a spice, and I guess it's spoilers for part 2, so I won't go into where the spice comes from, but the the very existence of the spice is a very fantasy concept, in my opinion, that is applied in a science fiction setting, just because of the mechanic of how it works. It's very much like the minuteness of it, but it's still a very fantasy rooted concept, I think.
Yeah, like Frank Herbert took. I want magic spice that has these properties, and then I'm going to sci-fi out how that works in the universe as much as possible. Yeah,
I
I
would
think.
say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
But no, I was just going to say, yeah, I think that's exactly what he did, and I think it works really well. But yeah, I think it is a magic spice initially.
So, Sam, would you classify Star Wars then as science fantasy?
So Star Wars, I do also classify. It's not, to not go wildly off topic, but to answer your question, the thing about Star Wars is that it doesn't meet the criteria for like hard science fiction, and anything that isn't hard science fiction is probably science fantasy, if you want to accept that as a genre. Like Star Trek or Stargate or whatever your go-to Farscape, your Battlestar Galactica, pick your poison of science fiction, hard science fiction, and even Farscape, I would say science fantasy. Anything with Jim Henson creature puppets, probably science fantasy. But the fact that it's rooted in a supernatural or a mystic magic concept lends it towards the storytelling and world building of a fantasy property, rather than the like careful methodic construction of a science fiction world. Like in Star Trek, basically everything can be explained. It might not be explained with real science, but it has a logical consistency within it. The way that warp drives work, the way that transporters work, the way that phaser arrays work, versus in Star Wars, the Force is a mysterious power that binds us all together.
And it's got like a spiritual connection, kind of like how
Right.
The Fremen and all view the spice as compared. I like that. It's like it's almost like smashing the science fantasy and the hard science fiction together with even the concept of like I really like the fact that nothing's going to top the 84 visualization of the shields, but I really do like how the technology of this world, well, beyond Arrakis, mind you, in a way, has evolved so much that it's a new scale of warfare. It's like we've gone back to blades because the shields are so good, guns don't work, and like because you're back to blades, like this more fantasy-like society, the Fremen kind of have an advantage over like the science fiction society of the, I guess what's the good term for it, the Imperium. That's more Warhammer, but yeah, have the advantage over that. And I do feel like overall Dune is more science fantasy, just because it seems a lot of the people, even the ones in like the militaristic, like futuristic technology empire, have an almost reverence to the spice, well, except for the Baron, who's just like, yeah, go ahead and sell our profits and make sure you don't sell it too quickly. But there's almost like yes, the spice. And I think that reverence is kind of it's one of the good things about the '84 movie and its kooky, kind of hokiness. It's like it actually kind of captured I guess the awe that people have of the spice. I mean, and it again, it's like with the weird inner monologue thing, but yeah, I think it captured that pretty well. Go ahead.
I would absolutely agree with that. It leans very heavily into the mysticism of it, which was popular at the time. It was, absolutely like the contemporary films for the '84 Dune are like the Beastmaster and like Conan and Masters of the Universe.
Mhm.
Like it leans very heavily into that sort of like mystic fantasy, and it does capture it well. It's just a poor it's a poor execution, but a good thing done within that poor execution, for sure.
Interesting.
But the interesting thing, and actually I just thinking about this, Herbert, this was actually the issue that Herbert ran into when trying to publish Dune, was that when he went around with this manuscript for Dune, all of the science fiction magazines basically told him that science fiction fans didn't want to read that much. Like science fiction is short stories and short stories only. That's what science fiction audiences want to read. And so
Dang, Frank, did you really expect me to read all that?
Exactly. And so he shopped that script around for a long time until he found someone who was willing to publish it. And if I remember correctly, I think I read somewhere it was actually published by a company that actually produced technical manuals.
Wow.
Because they were willing to take the risk on it when established science fiction magazines just said no, they weren't going to touch it because it was a fantasy novel with science fiction concepts.
Yeah.
Man. So we actually should probably be doing our final reviews and wrapping up, but just to go back to what you were saying originally, Sam.
I want more.
Just to make sure. So the main difference between science fiction and science fantasy, what you're saying, is a mystical element at the center of that world.
That's how I make that delineation. I don't know if other people find that helpful. Maybe that muddies the water. Maybe that's me being really pretentious. But it helps me kind of divide things up. If I'm going to recommend a movie to you, and I know that you like science fiction, but you don't really like fantasy, I might shy away from some of the properties that embody that sort of more fantasy elements than science fiction elements.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I feel like if you show a true blue, true blue nerd, like one of the four of us, it's like, Star Trek versus Dune. It's like there's a different feel that I feel like. Well, I feel like even if you're not a nerd, it's like there's a different feel you could probably pick up.
Yeah, I definitely am the kind of person where I have enjoyed Star Wars and now Dune a lot more than I enjoyed Star Trek, and they definitely have a feel like Star Wars and Dune. Obviously, like the very different tone. One of them is a lot more bleak than the other, but they do have that same kind of mystical, magical feel about how the world works that is different from how the Star Trek world works, for example.
At its core, a fantasy novel is just an elaborate fairy tale, and I think that's what makes them so accessible. Is that we all grew up with whatever culture you grew up in, whatever country, you had your traditional fairy tales, your fairy stories, your concepts that are your fables, things that are rooted in just a suspension of disbelief. If you accept this, then here is a story that goes with that acceptance. Versus, I think why, to speak to what Joe's saying, why a lot of people find science fiction a little bit harder to swallow is because it's very rigid, it's very explained, and it requires you to sort of like think through it. And it's not as a relaxing a style of entertainment, for sure.
I think there is a natural instinct that we have when we're kids to where the language of dream reality, where like obviously if you take the spice that expands your mind, it allows you to see into the future, because that just kind of makes sense in an abstract, not rational way. and that is the kind that we all have that as kids, and that we hold on to that as adults. Whereas learning the rational, very grounded, very scientific way of thinking about things is, first of all, like as culture is a very new thing. Like that's a very recent thing in human history, and also is a thing that every person has to individually learn. And I think that might be why, where I think that is where that line is drawn. I think that's where that it's is it the dreamlike reality where things make sense because of association, because of just implicit association, or is it the grounded reality where everything is scientifically explained in rational terms?
And that's ultimately the unforgivable thing about the 84 movie. You know, if you can accept that it's a work of its time, it's a very dispassionate science fiction heavy take. You know, the spice is retcon that allows the guild navigators to bend space like warp drive, not allows them to see into the future. The voice is actually a piece of hardware that anyone can use. It's not a special skill or a mystical ability that is passed down and kept secret by the Bene Gesserit. It takes all of the fantasy elements that make Dune such a beloved story, and explains them away in a very science fiction way that just doesn't. It has no respect ultimately for the source material, which is where that movie ultimately is the biggest disappointment.
Yeah. And I think that just goes back to with David Lynch. While he made a film called Dune and he had elements from Dune, he didn't get Dune. He didn't get the heart of Dune, which is, I think, the big difference between his film and Villeneuve's film.
I feel like he got Cliff Notes, saw that it said science fiction, and is like, oh yeah, the voice. So that's weird. That's like a cool power. What kind of technology does that instead of, going deeper? And, well,
Yeah.
Speaking of that, what is it? Again, I know, Sam, you're not the only one who's ever read Dune in this, but it's like for the folks who did. I've already forgotten who did. Joe, did you?
Yes, I read.
Okay, Joe and Sam. Sorry, I completely forgot. I saw a thing, I don't know, a mention that the voice is very different in the books in terms of how it's portrayed. It's like it does the same thing. It like forces the will or whatever of a person to do what you want, and they don't even realize it, that sort of thing. But I saw that how the voice is presented in the 2021 film is actually aesthetically, which is funny when you're describing sound, I guess, aesthetically similar to the 84 one, which is very different from how the book is. Is that true?
It's not. There are some things that don't convert from text to film easily. And so I think making the stylistic choice to make someone using the voice have an audibly different, like an audible distinction from regular speaking is kind of a necessary sin on the behalf of the medium. Because in the book, you can say, while the character, after the command is given, you can say that without even knowing, it was halfway through making the action before he realized that he was doing something he didn't want to do. And you can explain that because it doesn't ruin the pacing of the story. In a movie, you can't do that without some kind of interruptive, a subtitle, a VO, whatever terrible, atrocious method we use to perform exposition in film. And so you just have to accept that changes must be made in order to indicate that something different is happening.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. And the change.
Well,
sorry, Jack. Go on.
No, you're good. I'm just saying, whatever you're going to add, then we got to wrap this up. We're going over by like a lot.
Like I said, more. I got to say.
I think we could talk about this for another hour easy if we wanted.
Maybe a Dune Part 1, Part 2.
Oh,
never heard that one before.
If there's a second movie.
Bonus episode. Okay, real quick, the rest of the superstars. Visual effects team, amazing. Very good, very good. What is it? Just what was computer made, you couldn't tell because it was so well done and so well integrated. Lighting team, wonderful. Again, that's very much in part due to the director, but still. And costumes,
Oh
amazing.
yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. If there are not awards handed out for them, again, another strongly worded letter, and maybe a few, mostly peaceful riots. Anyway,
Or just use the voice on them.
Listen,
oh yeah,
if the first Suicide Squad can receive an Academy Award for costume design, surely Dune
literally
can also.
one costume, only one. That's I still can't believe that. Makes me. Ugh.
Surely Dune can at least be nominated. They
Surely.
absolutely
I don't know if
captured
wiser words have ever been said.
Oh, and one more technical superstar, editors. What is it? Again, mostly director stuff. I like the fact that it's like whenever Paul's compelled by the voice, it's like very choppily cut, and then of course the long. What is it? I was gonna say the fact that it's a very long movie, but the pacing is you barely notice it. You barely notice it. Like by the time you're halfway through, it's like, oh man, what happened? Because it's edited very well, paced very well. Like, and again, that kind of goes all the way back to the top. But again, technical prowess through the roof. Very nice.
Yeah. Well, Sam, since you are our guest / local expert, I'm going to give you the honor of giving your review first. We usually do like a 10-star scale. Some of us have different letters we use for our scales, but just to make things simple, we're using a 10-star scale for this. So
a 10-star scale.
For 10 point.
Yeah, 10 point, whatever.
Oh,
Stars
man.
are better.
I'll tell you what, with the understanding that there has got to be at least a part 2 to complete the story, and assuming that I'll be optimistic for once, that it's going to be as good and it's going to tie up the story in the same way that this one introduced it. I'm going to give this 10 sandworms out of 10. I'm ready. I am ready to see more. This movie made me want it. The excitement of watching this movie made me rewatch the 1984 Dune. It makes me want to reread the books. It makes me want to explore this world more. It even made me watch the documentary about Jodorowsky's Dune, which was going to be terrible, just so you know. It's a very interesting documentary. Sidebar. Don't necessarily recommend it, but it's definitely interesting if you watch it. This movie, it was epic. It was dramatic. It was faithful to the source material. It was absolutely everything I wanted to see. So yes, 10 sandworms / Chris Knives out of 10.
How about you, Joe?
I would say there are a couple little nitpicky things. Some of them that I brought up here, and there's a couple others. So I can't quite give it a perfect 10 out of 10, but it's definitely 9.5 out of 10. It is very good. I very much enjoyed it. And same as with Sam, it made me want to go and now read all the books in the series. So, and again, assuming that we get a part 2, because it is an unfinished story, but assuming we get a part 2, 9.5.
Yeah, for me, with there not being a part 2, I'd probably just at this point in time since nothing's been officially announced, I'm just giving it a 9 because I thought it was great, but it is an incomplete story. If there is, just like if Fellowship of the Ring was just that and they hadn't made Two Towers in Return, it probably would be like a 9 as well. But yeah, if they do make a part 2 and complete the story, I could easily see it being a 10 for both of them and being one of the best sci-fi or science fantasy odysseys of this decade. So I'm definitely very excited to hopefully see a part 2, and it definitely makes me very happy that I picked up the audiobook and gotten the book or borrowed the book, so I can knock those out and hopefully knock out at least that original trilogy. So very excited to step into that world after seeing this film. And how about you, Joseph?
Well, again, as the first true outing into Dune, as in like a very more accurate look. Again, I gotta say, loved it. It was very, very good. I eagerly await a part two. Again, my middle name could be cautiously optimistic. No, I'm full on optimistic this time. It's like, I'm very much expecting this story to get wrapped up, but as it stands, it stands on its own. It stands on its own as a technical powerhouse, as a very well told story with a very, very good cast. So that's a 9 out of 10 for me. I don't have a creative thing, unfortunately. Unlike Sam, I guess 9 poison molars out of 10.
Yeah.
There you go. Alrighty. Well, Sam, thanks so much again for hopping on.
Yeah,
I think
thanks,
we've
Sam.
all
Absolutely.
enjoyed
Thank you
it.
for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been a blast.
And yeah, well, this has been the Background Podcast where if you're listening, we appreciate you. And if not, it's okay because you weren't missing anything. So next week, I believe we're going to be capping off our Spooky Month Jamboree with a watch of The Thing. Is that right, guys?
I think that's the plan.
Fantastic.
Sam, I'm the only one who's seen The Thing amongst the three of us.
Hey.
I think we all kind of know what happens in it. But
Yeah, but it's not about the destination, man. It's about the journey.
well,
And
we'll
boy, is
get
it a
to-
journey.
We'll get to experience that next week.
Alrighty then. Well, then we will see you all next week. See ya.
Where's the spice? The spice melange.
Nice.
Spice.
The spice must flow.
Desert power.
Oh.